Thank you very much for being with us on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark, your host, and glad that you're able to come. I'm always hacking the job search process and reimagining it. So thank you very much for joining me this week. I have Bob McIntosh. Just so that we can get right into it, we always spend time talking beforehand. How are you, Bob?
I'm great, thank you. How
Good.
are you, Mark?
I'm doing great.
Good.
We're always talking about LinkedIn with Bob, and and which I think is a very central tool to job search these days, and it's become that. So I just want to dig in an article that Bob wrote recently, and the article is called Five Reasons Why LinkedIn Recommendations Should Get More Respect. I don't know if that would be the exact title of the episode, but definitely there are some very key things that people should know about recommendations. And Bob highlighted five of them in an article on his blog on thingscareerrelated.com. That's right, Bob. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Yep,
I
that's
just
it.
want to be sure I had the blog right.
Yep.
So five reasons or why recommendations should get more respect. The first point you made in the article, Bob, was once considered one of the most important sections of the profile. Could you
Yeah, do
expand on
you
that?
remember that? Do you remember when, in order to be classified as 100% or close to 100%
All
of
star
a profile,
profile.
all star, now it's all star, that having a certain number of recommendations was required? Well, that's no longer the case. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's been replaced by skills, and then
Yes.
skills get endorsed. So basically, skills and endorsements have sort of jumped over recommendations. I wouldn't say replaced them because recommendations are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to notice that recommendations were getting less respect when LinkedIn sort of cemented them down at the basement of the profile.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we were able to move other sections about,
Right.
but we couldn't move the recommendations.
Right.
And I thought that was a travesty because a lot of people relied on recommendations, especially, business people.
Right.
But that's one of my points as well.
Mm-hmm. I think, and this is a guess, that maybe the endorsements are a little bit easier for them to work the algorithm rather than the recommendations, because endorsements there's a lot more activity as opposed to the
Absolutely.
recommendations.
Absolutely.
Having said that, as far as value is concerned, recommendations is where it's at. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
ultimately,
Absolutely.
I mean, really, and we discussed this before, where recommendations are your referral engine on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely. I mean, what recruiters used to love them at the beginning because all they had to do was look at a person's profile, read the recommendations, and they did get a pretty good sense of the person, and wouldn't even have to call for those recommendations. They would just be there on the profile, and that's why it was considered one of the number one features on LinkedIn.
yeah,
But you know what? I think they just weren't moving fast enough. I think that people weren't writing recommendations as fast as LinkedIn would have liked.
right.
So long on skills and endorsements.
Well, for an entrepreneur, I can see how that could be. If somebody has their own business, they would have a steady flow of recommendations because of the clientele and
Absolutely.
they get
Yeah.
good service. But for somebody who's working, it's pretty much a one-off. You work for somebody. If they feel great about your work, they'll write the recommendations.
Yep.
Sometimes there are people work for companies where they would get recommendations, but the company policy speaks otherwise. So
True.
you're not going to get them like endorsements. So I can see from a business standpoint from LinkedIn why the endorsements can drive into getting more visibility for the user.
Yeah, yeah, and you said it earlier. You said that endorsements, they cause more activity on LinkedIn, and this is true.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about the difference between engagement and activity, then recommendations, that's engagement. I mean,
Yeah.
that's taken the effort to write that recommendation. Given thought to what the person has achieved,
Hmm.
and it takes time. And
It
I
does
just
take
think that
time.
it wasn't
Hmm.
moving fast enough for LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, and that's too bad because I think that's the actual, not just a referral, but when people do reference checks, that could skip part of that process. Is
But
that the recommendations could just supersede um, all else on the profile if you've got great recommendations.
yeah, absolutely.
So, nevertheless, your second point, say more about the recipient.
Oh yeah. So recommendations say much more about the recipient than endorsements do.
Hmm.
Uh, I know someone who has 99 plus endorsements for almost every skill, and I know he's a talented person. But I mean, you can gather enough endorsements if you have enough friends.
Hmm.
Yeah. But with the recommendations, they really say something about the person.
Yes.
As I said, it for someone to write a recommendation for you, it takes them some time and thought, and it really shows what they value in a worker.
Hmm.
So recommendations do say more about the recipient.
Yes. Yeah, I agree, and
But by the way,
they
Mark,
should.
do you remember the last time you received a recommendation?
Um, it was earlier this year, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm sure received many more endorsements since then. And I can, I was recently, received a recommendation, but before then it had been over a year, I'm sure.
Yeah,
It's just not
I
coming.
haven't got the endorsements have slowed down for me though.
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever pushed or asked publicly or say, could you please endorse me? I should, and that's not a bad idea actually. That people can go and ask several people to endorse, and I think it's worth it when you can get two or three to endorse than to ask one at a time.
sure.
But having said that, though, to drive visibility, to increase your endorsements, but I think again the the value, the substantive value comes from getting the recommendation and
Yeah, good point.
having someone spell out how you help them, and that way
Absolutely.
it seems a lot more real than somebody adding one because anybody can add do a plus one.
Yeah, yeah, and then you can endorse someone and not even have witnessed that person perform the skill.
Exactly.
I could endorse someone in New Zealand or Australia and never have witnessed that person
Right.
perform the skill. I guess the argument against what I've said is that, well, if you read a person's profile, you should get a pretty good sense of how that person would do in terms of performing those skills. But
Right.
still,
Well, I think there's evidence as well. Like for you and I, we write quite a bit. So
hmm
you can look at the evidence of our writing and make a decision whether it's endorsement worthy or not.
sure, sure,
Whether you experienced my services or not probably isn't necessarily the point, in as much as it that you have social proof that
true, true.
that you can you connect with that person and that they've helped, because you and I have had people who've come out of the blue and said, I followed your advice and I got the job, or I got the interview, or I got the recommendation, so, or I
Whereas
got the
you and I were
promotion.
talking earlier, they've seen our writing and they've contacted us because they want some individual assistance.
Yes.
And I would say for the most part, my clients, and I'm sure your clients have been very happy with our work.
Yeah.
But um,
Well,
recommendations. I mean, like you said, they're just great references.
right. Or another way to look at it is that it's an endorsement of trust.
hmm
As far as endorsement, I know we're talking about recommendations, but if you think about trust is really the kind of the cash flow
hmm
of driving someone to your profile to look at you further. If you've gained the trust and what either we do writing, you're blogging or vlogging or you're doing a podcast or whatever, people have heard your voice in their head, whether it's a physical voice or through writing
Right.
or through that medium, and that they say, hey, great information, let me go and give that as support. So, you know, again, I understand it, but again, recommendations shouldn't be devalued at all.
No, no.
Yeah,
And another point is that now you can't move any of your sections around on your profile.
yeah,
There was a time when you could,
right.
other than recommendations and maybe interest, but now everything is anchored. And
Yes,
um, maybe for Sales Navigator, not, but for every other, um, you know, account, the sections are anchored. I will say that I am happy that, underneath the skills and endorsements are recommendations.
hmm
So, that's given them the recommendations a little more respect.
right. Well, a suggestion for some users, and this might be an idea that you can actually take a quote from one of your recommendations and put it in your summary part,
Absolutely,
and
absolutely,
then that will lead them to read look down further for your recommendations.
absolutely. Or
It's,
as one resume writer has done in his summary, is he said, if you want to see, you know, the testimonials from my clients, then go down to the recommendations. If you
sure,
want to see the quality of my work, then read my recommendations.
sure,
So, yeah,
sure.
that's right.
Well, something that LinkedIn could do to drive a little traffic is to have a little badge for someone's profile, which I think they were entertaining at one time. Where if you go to that person's website, if you have one, or a job seeker has a website, or maybe even a link to, well, people have links to their profile, but something that will highlight recommendations, and then they can just
Absolutely.
go to
Yeah.
that section. But you know, who knows? Maybe it'll lead that way. Number three, say something about the writer, and I
Well,
think that
so as I was saying earlier, when you write someone a recommendation, that shows what you value in that particular person
mm-hmm,
and a good worker. And also, when you write a recommendation, your writing better be good, because if people read it, then they're going to judge you on your writing.
yes,
So that, to that point, and on the flip side, I always tell my clients never to accept a recommendation that's poorly written, because that is a reflection on you. But yeah, so for the person writing a recommendation, the writing has to be good.
yeah,
There can't be any mistakes.
yeah, yeah, and because people ask, this is your boss, or this was your
Right, right.
who? So you don't want people to think uh, negatively.
No,
And really, you don't want people to think. You should read it and take it at first at face value, and
yeah,
probably for the user, it doesn't hurt to kind of coach people. If they said that, can he write you a recommendation, or if you're asking a recommendation, says if you can write a recommendation stating blah 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 blah, and
absolutely.
if you
Yeah,
have several people recommending you for the same position or the same industry, you can make it like a piece of the puzzle and have them speak to different parts of it
yep.
instead of having someone saying he was a good worker, he was really productive, blah blah blah. You
No,
can
that's
really
an
speak
excellent
to,
point.
yeah, and have
But
it
what may also happen is that you may have to write your own recommendation. Like if you ask someone to write a recommendation for you and they're sort of dragging their feet,
yeah,
and I've done this myself. I've reached out and I've said, would you mind if I wrote my recommendation and then you can just approve of it? And you know what? They were ecstatic. They were like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I have one.
Write the recommendation and I'll approve it. And that's harder for a person wanting to receive a recommendation, but it may come to that.
Yeah, yeah, and
You know,
to write it really well, and hopefully the person that can
exactly.
write real well.
I got to say that I asked one woman if I could write my recommendation and if she would approve of it. And when I sent it to her, I got back in return something that was 3 times longer than what I had written.
Ah,
So obviously, she saw more value in me than I thought I had in myself.
right, right, right. Well, yeah, well, our gig is getting to the point.
Yeah, yeah,
and and bless her heart, she saw that you had a lot more. You gave a lot more value than
yeah.
you were willing to write at that particular time. So that works out
Yeah,
just
sometimes we
fine.
don't see the value in ourselves as much as others do.
And that's why you really want other people to write it.
Yeah, yeah.
You
But then
know,
on the other hand, you may get a recommendation that's so brief, it basically says nothing. And I've seen this on my clients' profile.
I've had that
Have you
happen.
seen that? It's like, it's not even a paragraph, not maybe two or three lines, and that's
I've
it.
had I think there were 4 or 5 of them I took off the grid because they were
Yeah, yeah.
just too too brief, too
Yeah,
truncated.
we should remind your listeners that you don't have to display a recommendation if you don't like it.
Right. Right.
You can always
Yep.
send it back and ask for, corrections. But if you just don't like it, if it's full of fluff, then don't
Yeah.
display
Just don't display it.
it. Yeah.
Having said that, I did have a question for you as far as should you have how many recommendations should you have on your profile? I mean, if you have 40, should you show all 40 of your recommendations?
Well, I think that depends on your occupation. So, for instance, if you are a business person,
Mm-hmm.
I know, as I was saying, the resume writer I mentioned earlier, he had about 69 recommendations. And I bet when he woke up and he saw that the recommendations were no longer at the top of his profile, but more at the bottom, that he must have had a heart attack or something. But,
Right.
for someone like that, the more recommendations, the better. But
Right.
then there's also this image of someone having too many recommendations, and people wonder how did this person get so many recommendations,
Right.
you
Right.
know
Well, I can
so
understand why
so
how
I don't know what kind of number to put on it. I mean, what do you think?
well, they're real users.
Yeah.
I mean, you can only assume that. Um, I just don't know if what's the difference between 5 and 69. You know what I
I
mean? As
I
far
think, two per position, hopefully from supervisors, managers, and so forth. I think that should suffice, just as long as they're well written and they say enough about the person.
right. Well,
Maybe some from colleagues, but definitely if you are in your own business, then you want to have some from your clients, and the
right.
more the better in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. If you're an entrepreneur or if you have
Right.
entrepreneurial
Like
tendencies,
you yourself. I mean, if people aren't writing them for you, which they should, because you're very good at what you do, then you could ask for them, and try to amass as many as you can.
yeah, and I struggle with it because, like I said, I've gotten more than what I've displayed, and there's some clients. There's one client. Oh gosh,
Oh no! Can you tell me how many more you've gotten than you've displayed?
uh, it's not that many more.
Not that many
So
more,
I'm
but
not.
you
I'm not
got
trying
some that
to.
you
I'm
just
not
haven't
trying to
displayed.
break any
Yeah.
records. Yeah, there's not too many more.
No.
But there was like 4 or 5 others that were really short,
I hear you.
and
Yeah.
or they just didn't say it wasn't substance. Didn't have substance.
Right. Right.
And there was one person I took off because they they got caught up in a small scandal, so I pulled theirs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah. You're
pulled
guilty
theirs
by
because
association.
I did right, and I did at the time. Now they may have been forgotten about this scandal. I said, no, I think we'll pull them for a little while at least.
Right. Right. Right.
But yeah,
So you.
that's something
So
that's something
I
else to
know.
consider in your recommendations. This person's been in the news for something infamous or
Uh huh.
notorious. You
Uh
might want to
huh.
consider pulling them from your profile.
So now I need to know who this person is. So no, you had said earlier that LinkedIn, previously LinkedIn did a very good job of trying to vet the people who wrote recommendations. In other words, you had to know the relationship where the
Right.
two people work
Mm-hmm.
together, um, and a bunch of other criteria.
Uh-huh.
Well, LinkedIn has pretty much laxed on that.
Yeah.
So the downfall of that is that the recommendations are no longer listed under certain companies. So you
Mhm.
don't know where these recommendations are coming from unless the writer has said that in the recommendations,
Yeah.
which I think, is kind of a disservice to it.
Well, which would cause if you're going to be able to use that as a possible reference,
Right,
you're
right.
having you're having the person go look at the person's profile to see if the first they checked what company did that apply
Exactly.
to,
Right. So if a
and
recruiter is looking for a particular company and can't find a recommendation under that company like they used to,
yeah.
then they're going to just have to be searching through all those recommendations to find.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have
To,
69 of them and they're trying to find five good ones,
yeah, I know.
that that might
That's
be
true. That's true. Would it be nice
problematic.
if you could sort of organize them from best to
Exactly.
worst? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And um and that's not to say that in someone's description to fight that is to quote under the company which that person wrote
yeah, yeah,
the recommendation for, so that way you have the quote and you have the person,
right.
and
So you,
then they're
you're talking
connect.
about in the summary, right?
Yeah, not
Using
just in
the
the summary,
excerpt.
but I think in the excerpt you can
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
do that automatically. But
Yeah, like it was a pleasure working for working with Bob at such and such a company, and then list all of the platitudes,
absolutely.
good stuff.
Let's go to number four. Their testimonials for business owners, which we kind of touched
Well,
on a
right,
little bit.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, to elaborate on that, I really think that if you are a business owner, you want to have as many testimonials as you can.
Yeah,
And you know what? Asking for testimonials after you've asked people to pay you is pretty it's pretty tough. It takes a lot of gall.
yeah, it is.
To me, it does, but there are people who know how to do it, and they get not only they pay the payment from their client, but they also get a testimonial from them, which in the end could be as valuable, if not more valuable. So,
Well, I would add a sub point to that too, is that there are places where you volunteer,
oh
and
yeah, oh yeah,
and and that might be a part of the equity that you'll ask in return for the services or
true,
things.
true,
It's just not only the work experience, but just to have some kind of proof that that you did a good job and that you gave them
absolutely,
value. So you can
absolutely,
ask them to write a recommendation, or could you write a recommendation for them and they sign off on it, and
yep,
maybe get a physical letter in addition to being able to have them insert it into your recommendation, uh,
right.
so that
Also,
way.
another sub point to that is if you have a relationship with certain people on LinkedIn and you admire the work they've done either through writing or podcast or videos,
Hmm.
then you can write them recommendations.
Yep.
You could ask for recommendations.
Yep.
I mean, we may have not worked together at any point, but we admire the work
Yeah.
each of us
Yeah.
have done. So,
Again, that adds to the trust factor, that I trust this
exactly. Yeah.
person expertise because of what they showed in these
Right.
areas.
Which you
Yeah, I
wouldn't
have
get with
I have
endorsement.
one. I have a couple like that. I have a couple like
Yeah,
that actually wrote it because of the podcast, or
absolutely.
the
Yeah.
value they receive from the blog, etc. So yeah, I think that's pretty valid. Pretty valid. Number five, can be used as excerpts for quotes on your resume.
So what you said earlier about using some of the verbiage in the summary,
Mm-hmm.
an excerpt from a recommendation, which may be much longer, but using it in the summary. I've often suggested to clients that they do that because those can be a form of accomplishment statements.
Yes. Yes.
If you are having a hard time quantifying your positive results in your accomplishments, then I think an excerpt of or a quote of any kind, what other
Mm-hmm.
people write about you weighs more heavily than what you write about yourself.
Sure. Sure.
So,
And there are other ways to even use it as well. Like if you want to take a screenshot of that person and the recommendation, you can use it like if you have your own blog,
yeah,
or
yeah,
if you just want to put it out there on the social networks, what people are
good point.
saying,
Good point. Yeah, absolutely.
the screenshot aspect to work, or you can take the screenshot, go to canva.com, where
Uh
you
huh.
can make a little, a little a photo or
Uh-huh.
image showing it and make it more attractive that way. And you can put it in key strategic places. That could be used in that kind of way as well.
Wow. Yeah. So, you're the guru of social media. So now you made me think that, what I should have done
No, no,
is I should have
no,
taken the screenshot. Oh, you hate the word guru like me?
no,
What I should have
no.
done is taken a screenshot of a recommendation that I received and used it in my blog,
Yeah, and you could do
just
that.
as a
I,
visual.
I've I don't remember if I have that portion. I think I had it out there and I took it off the grid for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you can do it that way because they're real recommendations, and you can
Right.
associate the user with with the compliment. And I think it increases the amount of social proof that's there because they know it's a
Social
real
proof,
person as
trust.
opposed to
Yeah.
in trust and saying that's this Amy L, which could be anybody can make up,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
to showing the screenshot, the picture, and who wrote it in the name. They can go LinkedIn and see the same thing. That makes it even more valid and gives it much more credibility
Oh,
as
and
well.
so, and you could also, if you want, take a screenshot and put it in the media area under your summary
Yes.
or the, the company for which you worked. Yeah, you could do that as well.
Sure, sure, sure.
Good
But all
point.
of that to help you make your LinkedIn profile much more robust. And
Exactly.
again, those layers of credibility to me are much more substantive than, uh, you know, again, as far as value, but understanding that the endorsements has value too. And again, if you're looking to get more
I think what
visibility,
endorsements have done, and to LinkedIn's credit, is they have really ramped up the engagement. Well, not the engagement, but the activity. You know,
anything's
they've got people
considered.
interacting with each other. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
And depending who you talk to and their definition, and you recently wrote an article about engagement and versus being active.
Yeah, yeah. That's my
Yeah,
big trip home.
that's right, right. A like to LinkedIn is engagement, but a like to advance your career is not as much engagement as it's not. It doesn't tell you much about get for people to know, like, and trust you as
Yeah.
much.
Well,
Um,
I mean, to me, a like, just to simply like, click like on a post, shared post or an article, is activity. Whereas if you write a comment about said post or article,
mhm.
then that's more engagement. And I sort of equate recommendations more with engagement than just activity.
Yeah,
Whereas endorsements, they're just activity.
right.
It's just pressing a button.
Yeah, right. But to LinkedIn, that's engagement.
Yeah.
So that's where it
Yes.
is.
Thank you.
So, Bob, anything you got coming up that people should know about? You want them to follow?
Uh, no, I'm just going to keep writing about LinkedIn and the job search, and I will be working with Jim Peacock and
Nice.
his organization, and conducting a LinkedIn seminar, 5 week seminar. So I'm looking forward to that.
Very nice. And um, so people can get you and find you at thingscareerrelated.com.
We're related, and just if you want to find me on LinkedIn, just type in Bob McIntosh. I'll appear
Yep.
definitely.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Him and his tens of thousands of followers. So.
yeah, I wish.
Well, actually, you're running around the 10,000 mark, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah, a little bit over, but
Yeah. So
who's counting, right?
no, not really counting. Not really. Well, Bob, thanks so much for being on the
Hey,
Voice of
it was a
Job
pleasure.
Seekers, and thank you all for listening to the great conversation. If you ever want to contact me, you can go to voiceofjobseekers.com. You can press the send voicemail button and leave me a message right there on your laptop. It'll activate your mic automatically. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy your week, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Okay.